Hello everybody, my name is Stuart Harmon and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar brought to you by Oliver Wight. Today's presentation is called The Keys to Process Sustainability. Many companies have embarked on change journeys and delivered fantastic results, find that a few months or years later the hard-earned gains have evaporated or at best diminished. Many of our change programs at Oliver Wight are around integrated business planning implementations, and so in today's webinar you'll see some examples relevant to integrated business planning. Integrated business planning, or IBP itself, is essentially a change program and requires the same level of support for sustainability as the change to set it up does. During this webinar today, we're going to presume a level of knowledge around IBP and not go into the implementation pathway in detail, but we'll look at our experience of why change stalls and what can be done better. Following the presentation, we'll have some time for a question and answer segment where we'll answer individual questions submitted by members of the audience. So while listening to our presentation today, I encourage everyone to submit questions at any time by typing in the comment section you can see on your screen for questions. Remember also, today's webinar will be available on demand, so you'll be able to view it again at your convenience or share it with friends and colleagues. You'll receive an email with a link to access the webinar within the next few days. Now, I'd like to introduce myself and welcome today's other speaker, Rod Hozak. So my name is Stuart Harmon. I'm based in Sydney, Australia. I've spent 15 years working in key change agent roles in major manufacturing organisations around the world before starting my career with Oliver Wight. I've got a lot of knowledge in a number of industries, including metals and fast-moving consumer goods, and I've developed a lot of experience in improving and linking processes across organisations and supply chains mainly to enable the successful deployment of strategy. In what's coming up for 10 years now at Oliver Wight, I've supported clients to successfully implement and improve detailed planning and execution processes, integrated business planning, supply chain improvement, and also deployment of strategy. My colleague, Rod Hozak, is also based in Sydney, and Rod's got 15 years hands-on experience in the pharmaceutical industry and now nearly 20 years experience in consulting. He's delivered many successful business improvement programs with large blue chip organizations, including Abbott Laboratories, British American Tobacco, Caterpillar and Fonterra, helping these companies on their journey to Class A business excellence. Rod is an accomplished strategist and has a proven record of effective implementations that deliver tremendous value for his clients. Now, Rod and myself have authored many publications, a few on the screen here. I just wanted to point out, to access a full list of white papers written by our associates from around the world, go to the Oliver Wight website and you find a wide range of topics, all written by experienced and hands-on practitioners. And the great thing is you can get them all for free. So I encourage you to go and have a look. So let's have a look at the agenda for today's webinar. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of Oliver Wight in a moment, and then we'll look at why sustainability is important and also why change programs stall or don't quite achieve their goals. We'll then go into a little more detail about the 5 key elements required for sustainability, and then we're going to finish off our webinar with a brief case study. And then we'll wrap up, allowing some time at the end to answer as many questions as time permits. So if you've got a question, again, please let us have it, and we'll do our best to answer. And we'll be using real life examples wherever we can. So I'd like to introduce our organisation, Oliver Wight, a firm that's been a thought leader now for nearly 50 years. As you can see, we were formed in 1969 by Oliver Wight. That's his picture there with the glasses on the screen. Ollie, along with Joe Orlicke, invented MRP, so materials requirements planning, and that evolved into MRP2, and Ollie went on to pioneer its use in industry and build many more practices that are commonplace today, such as sales and operations planning, which originated in the early 80s, integrated business planning as it's evolved to now, and also collaborative planning, forecasting and replenishment. There are 60 Oliver Wight associates around the world, all experienced practitioners with what we call Class A credentials, which means they've all worked in successful change programs or transformation programs, and we deploy our associates as teams to maximize results. There are no graduate recruits doing the legwork in our organization. each of our 60 associates has joined Oliver Wight after having a real job in industry and holding a very senior position. Most of us have got at least 15 years industry experience under our belt before we become Oliver Wight people. We've undertaken initiatives with hundreds of organisations in the last 50 years, including many household names: Caterpillar, Procter & Gamble, Merck, Cummins, Adidas, even the US Army. We've worked on many global implementations, including with Abbott Laboratories International, DuPont, Avon, General Mills, Cummins, and Mondelez. In fact, 1/3 of the current Fortune 500 companies have used Oliver Wight to support their improvement efforts. So how do we help? Well, our focus is on helping our clients sustainably transform and improve their business and personal performance. One senior executive at a client organization, when recently asked to describe the impact of the transformation initiative that we'd supported with them, said, look, this has been a massive positive change in the organization that is not going away. And that sustainability part is very important. So let's get into the teeth of this webinar. Let's talk about sustainability. Right, so I want to start by looking at our typical approach to transformation. So Oliver Wight uses a well-proven transformation process that is aptly called the proven path. That's because we've been using it for nearly 50 years now, and it builds on that 50 years of collective experience. The model's been validated against Kotter's 8-step model, and there are 3 main phases to our approach. The first of these, you'll see coming up on the screen now, is the lead or leadership phase, and this is where we excite, commit, and or we generate excitement and commitment and direction and readiness for change. The second phase is the transform phase, and this is where we look to establish teams and agents of change within the client organization. The third of our main phases is the own phase, and this is where we're looking to help the client organization leverage the capability that they've built, leverage the behavior change that they've undertaken, and then take advantage of that change and realize the benefits. So this webinar is about sustainability. So we're not going to go through each of the elements that you see on the screen here. I could talk about this model for a day, so we haven't got time to do that. But I did want to set the scene by saying that all transformation projects start out with a goal, and quite often these are quite lofty goals, and the value opportunity that's been identified is typically the driver of a decision to do something. This webinar is about how you're going to sustain that outcome. So while the sustain element is only just one step in a whole transformation program, it can make the difference between delivering the whole benefit of that transformation program or just getting some temporary gains and having to restart another transformation several years or even months later. So we know that the business benefits can be huge. A lot of the programs that we support our clients with, they're integrated business planning programs, but we apply the same logic to many other change programs we're engaged in. Demand management or forecasting improvement programs, initiatives or programs to implement or improve the product portfolio management processes, driving improvement in the extended supply chain. It might be lean programs, many more. The process is always the same and is usually based on answering 2 initial questions. The first of these is, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? And something's prompted us to think there's some value available. So what is it that we're looking to overcome or solve? The second question then is, what's the value we could release if we solve that problem? Now we've got coming up on the slide here some analysis of areas of benefits achieved from this is from integrated business planning implementations. You can see that the potential value released can be huge. So as we progress through our material here, I just want to get you thinking about sustaining process improvement in your organization. So let's move on to our first polling question. So to make this a little bit interactive, what we'd like you to do is have a think of change programs you've been involved in. What percentage have been sustained over a number of years? So you should see the poll now come up on your screen. If you can give us some feedback. So if if less than 30% of those programs have been sustained, tick there. 30 to 49%, 50 to 79%, or greater than 80%. Now, these change programs could be anything really, such as a new ERP system upgrade, could be a cost out program, could be a significant restructure or merger or acquisition, a significant new way of working, something like integrated business planning if you've done that with us, or even just a simple office move. So we'll just give you a little bit of time to give us some responses. Thank you. I can see some responses flowing in. That's good. Thank you, those of you who've responded. Now, the responses look similar to a study we conducted in one particular firm that demonstrated a significant change over a 2-year period. I mean, they really got some great results initially, but then they found they slid back in performance and value delivered in the subsequent year. I'm going to hand over to Rod now to look at why that might happen.
Thank you, Stuart, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. In this case study, the company, the name's going to be withheld to protect the innocent, so to speak, had spent 2 years redefining the way they worked after realising that was the implication from a very poor ERP system implementation. The goal was to align their business processes to a best practice level, in this case specifically to achieve top quartile performance, which would then form the foundation for the company to move on to top decile performance thereafter. As evidence now supports, doing the basics extraordinarily well will give a company the platform to launch into delivering exponential better results, as we'll talk about a bit later. The problem here, however, was that they could not hang on to the top quartile performance once they got there. To understand why, an internal survey was conducted using a reverse Kotter 8-step model. Reverse in the sense that instead of looking at the 8 steps to facilitate change, we looked at the 8 elements that potentially caused the reversal of what were excellent improvements and results at the time. The 8 steps are not establishing and maintaining a great enough sense of urgency, not creating a powerful enough guiding coalition, read that as the lead team, lacking a powerful enough vision, under-communicating the vision, not removing obstacles to the new vision, not systematically planning for and creating short-term wins, declaring victory too soon, and not anchoring changes in the corporation's culture. About 100 stakeholders in the business were interviewed. There was about a 1,700-person organisation, and they were from a wide range of functions and positions. And the results showed that the sustainability mechanisms were not in place. While there was some feedback about not establishing and maintaining a great enough sense of urgency, the major areas uncovered were right near the end of the program. That is, declaring victory too soon and not anchoring changes in the corporation's culture, these being the key to today's webinar. While you could excuse, for want of a better term, this situation by some of the exceptional circumstances the company was going through at the time, such as a whole site relocation, significant senior management turnover. There were 4 CEOs, 3 CFOs, 3 supply chain directors, 2 marketing directors, and you could say the excuse list goes on. But the important part for sustainability is that it needs to be able to transcend people and big events. And while setbacks in businesses are always going to occur, the question is, how do you build in resilience to bounce back even in the face of major events? So let's see how we might approach this. The next slide articulates the 5 keys of sustainability. The first is education and training. Second, communication and feedback. The third, formality and discipline. I know that's a dirty word, but discipline's important. Role descriptions and appraisals and the reward and recognition approach. And to get the full benefit, they all need to be addressed and work in unison. Notice that it's depicted as a cycle. That's because each element should be continually adapting and changing as circumstances change and improvements are found, but we'll address that in a little more detail later on. Let's now take a deeper look at each element. At Oliver Wight, we have a simple but powerful model of thinking about change. The first thing is to make sure people have the requisite knowledge and know the expected behaviours for the new ways of working. The second is to use that knowledge in conjunction with aligning to best practice to design processes and ways of working that suit business. While much of best practice is already well documented, all business have their unique elements which must be taken into account when change is required, because those unique elements are highly likely to be part of the company's competitive advantage. Lastly, if we do all those steps right, we'll then know exactly what technology we want to deploy to facilitate good process and support making people's working lives easier. The education part is in the first bubble, and it is the why we do things the way we do, or in transformations, why we want to change. Without the why, you may still get compliance from people, but you won't win their hearts and minds. Training, however, is the how we do what we do. I often refer to this as knowing how to press the buttons to make things work. And this is important in bringing it all together to optimise the support for people by facilitating the optimal use of tools that are available. It's noteworthy to point out here, however, that studies in computer system use in business, especially ERP systems, is usually less than 20% of what's been purchased. This is a huge untapped potential, or a waste, depending on how you look at it. It's essential, however, that both the why and the how are not only addressed during the transformation, but ongoing thereafter. The thereafter bit is where many organisations stall, often reverting to just the training part, or even dropping the education and training altogether, opting for a learn-on-the-job approach. At Oliver Wight, we believe in learning on the job, but not at the expense of dropping off the education and training. While there could be a huge breadth and depth of knowledge that companies expect people to acquire, the minimum set for sustainability, and we would expect to see in the induction program, are health and safety. This is obviously really important. The quality system and continuous improvement methodology, including a formal housekeeping program. This is often left to operations or the quality team, but it should be on everyone's agenda. Leadership, and not just for the lead team. The philosophy is that everyone in the organisation has to use leadership skills at some time in their role and need to know the fundamentals and be given permission, in an organisational sense, to practice it continually. The company's management and decision-making process, this would be captured in our integrated business planning and support processes, and it's there to make sure people know how decisions are made, as well as what decisions they are authorised to make before escalating, and then who to escalate to. The more detailed planning and execution processes, often this is left to the supply chain team, but planning and execution are fundamental parts of any business and all functions, and incorporate plans beyond just supply chain. And if it's so important for the business success, we should aspire to be really good at this. Strategic planning and execution, these processes are often contained within a strategy department or within the lead team and never see the light of day for everyone else. Everyone needs to know how it works, what their role is in giving input, as well as taking on the execution. There's an old saying that it is better to have an average strategy well executed than a great strategy poorly executed. And there's the usual onboarding procedures. And no, don't forget to let people know about the restrooms and where to get a coffee. While this list is not exhaustive, it should give you an idea of the breadth and depth of knowledge needed to maintain change. On the screen shortly is an example of an education induction program, I should say, of a client of ours. And as you can see, it includes sessions on key processes, leadership, the 5 whys, which is part of their continuous improvement program, and much more, excuse me. And before those eagle-eyed people spot it and say, where's health and safety? I know this particular company does health and safety really, really well, but it's under a different calendar. So lastly, the refresher education is the final piece of the education loop to close. Like other aspects of sustainability, it is often overlooked or given lip service. And I even said when I was in industry, gee, we've just been through a massive change, lots of education, process redesign and systems upgrades, and you want me to do education all over again? Well, that's not likely. But for want of a better term, we do need refresher education if, for nothing else, we know knowledge wanes over time. There are, however, a number of other reasons to do refresher education, and they are, as the year progresses, it's only human nature to take shortcuts and skip over vital parts of the process. And the problem is, it only needs to happen once, and it makes it all too easy to do it again and eventually arrive at a condition an old boss of mine used to call continental drift, where slowly and imperceptibly people, processes, plans, and the use of technology drift apart. The other area is to share the continuous improvement journey. As Toyota has been demonstrating for more than 50 years, continuous improvement never ends. And so after a year of working a process, by definition, there will be a number of changes and enhancements that should amount to making up a pretty good story for the annual refresher sessions. This will also mean policies and procedures will need updating. Now, you shouldn't wait until the annual document control signal to refresh your policies and procedures, but and that should be continuous. But at the time they are up for review and sign off, it's a perfect opportunity to update people on exactly what's changed over the last 12 months, and there should be a fair bit of change. Lastly, it's also the opportunity to share the wins that have been gained during the preceding 12 months. I often get a groan from clients when I say, when they say, how can we do all that at once? And my response is, you don't have to do it all at once. The policy and procedure update and refresher can be staggered during the year. So that's not such a big drain on resources of the business. Let's now move on to the second key to sustainability, communication and feedback. I'm going to hand back to Stuart to take us through this next section.
Thank you, Rod. So communication and feedback. Look, unfortunately, companies don't usually group communication and feedback under the one heading. But at Oliver Wight, we do, because communication encompasses virtually everything you do. If you think about even the daily, weekly, monthly, and annual management processes you have in your organization, the meetings associated with them, they're essentially organized communication. The 3-bubble Venn diagram that Rod showed earlier with knowledge and behavior and process and technology, they're integral to communicating, agreeing and adhering to one set of plans and numbers to run the business. And so to ensure those processes, actions and tools are continually meeting the needs of the business, feedback is vital. Now, as a regional HR vice president, who's now at AstraZeneca, who we know, once commented on communication, if you want people to help you and come along with you, share information with them. Now, that's just common sense, really. I mean, just read it as a practical comment about communication. Richard Branson, in his book, The Virgin Way, How to Listen, Learn, Laugh and Lead, takes the reader through his experience with gaining feedback through listening intently, asking lots of questions to solicit more information, and how he and Virgin use this to learn and become better leaders and have a lot of fun along the way. Now, there need to be 2 approaches to communication. The first one is a deliberate and budgeted, you don't get this for free, communication plan for the initial part of the transformation journey. And we've got an example on the screen there. But what many organizations miss out on is the ongoing formal communication plan. And we show an example of that on our next slide. So even in a well-deployed transformation program, communication is still needed to reinforce the new ways of working, to update people on the changes that are occurring, and continue to publish the wins. Now, I very firmly believe that success breeds success. So, publicising those wins is really important. This example is from a company entering into their annual strategic planning process. So once you have a formal communication plan, for it to continually improve and be more effective, there needs to be continual feedback. So let's have a look at some examples of feedback. So feedback can take many forms. So this example on the screen now is a post-meeting critique approach, which is great for the early days of changing a meeting structure and looking to change behaviour. It's designed to capture improvement actions based on 4 questions. The first of these, what should we start doing? Second, what should we stop doing? Third, what should we be doing more of? And the fourth, what should we be doing less of? Those of you who've worked with Oliver Wight in the past, you may remember us talking to you about this approach. The next example is a more complex meeting or process critique, which is built from the process's guiding principles and meeting agenda and scores each section on a scale of 0 to 3. The important point of this one is actually not the scoring, but the actions that the score drives. While there may be several improvement actions taken at each session, the strategy really needs to focus on applying 1 or 2 by the next iteration. If you think about this, let's say this is around integrated business planning process, which is something that we do once a month. If we're able to make 2 improvements to the process every month, that would be 24 improvements across the year. You get some good value from that level of improvement. The final example on the screen here is an example of a process survey done on an IBP process to gauge understanding and engagement. So this becomes a virtuous cycle as you get into it. Anthony Robbins, the personal development expert, I'm sure many of you have come across, he refers to this as CANI, standing for continuous and never-ending improvement. It sounds simple, and it is simple, but it requires discipline and aligned culture to support staying at it for the long term. It's easy to get distracted, so you've got to be intentional about this. Speaking of discipline, our next section takes a deeper dive into formality and discipline. So I hand you over to Rod again to take us through that section.
Hello again, and thanks, Stuart. If you haven't read Great by Choice, it's a must-read for everyone in business. Jim Collins identifies 3 common traits of companies that have outperformed the stock market by 10 times over a 20-year period, hence the term 10x companies. The first of the 3 traits is fanatic discipline. As you can see on the screen, it is defined as consistency of action, consistency with values, consistency with long-term goals, consistency with performance standards, consistency of method, and consistency over time. So how do you get this consistency without a disciplined approach? In this section, we'll describe what is required for this often maligned area of business sustainability. It is, however, absolutely necessary for maintaining a high-performing company and maintaining the knowledge within the group, in the company. The first, we're going to cover 3 of those key elements that I'm sure you'll be familiar with: policy, procedure, and process mapping, and they're quite different things. Policy is another name for the rules by which the company or the business is going to be run. We therefore want a lead team member to formally own each policy. This means being responsible for ensuring the policies are current, aligned with strategy, and aligned with the way people actually work. For further information, there's a great article on the Oliver Wight website by Dawn Dent called Process Ownership. It's worth a read. This is the important bit though. Since policy sets the rules by which we're going to run the company, it is expected that all the lead teams sign them off. And before you say, that's going to be impossible to get everyone on the lead team aligned and have the time to sign off such document, remember the policy part are the rules that we're going to run the business by, and it should only be a few pages, maybe 3 to 5 is normal. They must, however, at least capture the roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities to ensure the human resource element is well considered in making the ways of working work. Just as an aside, these terms are often used synonymously, but they actually mean quite different things. A role is what a person does. The responsibility is how they do it, and the accountability is how they're going to be measured. Hopefully you can now start to see the importance of the policy part of the policy and procedures. It's about agreeing the rules of running the business and providing people guidance. The procedures and process mapping part of it, however, is at a more granular level, and the ownership and approval can be limited to just the lead team owner and those directly engaged in the process. The test of good procedures, however, they are highly graphical. The weighty tome of extensive Word documents should be a thing of the past, and hopefully none of your companies get into that level of detail nowadays. Why? Because no one reads them, let alone follows them. They need, however, to have enough detail for someone new to the process to be able to follow them, albeit the first time is normally a bit clunky. And this should go without saying, but they must be aligned with what is actually being done now. Not what we hope is being done, nor what the company aspires to being done. There needs to be a document control process and tools that enable easy access and reference to policies and procedures. They should be user-friendly enough to be used in induction and refresher education, and kept relatively simple. Not simplistic, but we should not be trying to codify everything. And where that level of detail is required, such as setting up standard operating procedures or SOPs for safe and effective setup and running of a major machine, then that's a different level of documentation than what we're talking about here. Also, rigidity and inflexibility will eventually kill the value of policies and procedures over time. The process and tools must facilitate change as things change, and indeed encourage constant updates to the ways of working as continuous improvements are demonstrated. Thereby, they're kept relevant and current. A simple way to think about the continuous improvement part is the 3 C's of process improvement: challenge, change, and control. We need to encourage continuous improvements, making sure that when newer and more effective ways of working are found, they are captured, contained, and controlled through the document control process. This is, after all, the most effective way of embedding knowledge and retaining that knowledge in a business. Well, next to making sure no one leaves their role or ever leaves the company. Now, that's a pretty unrealistic aspiration. So moving on to our next poll question to get us ready for the next section. If you could see on your screen, answer the question: what level of importance is placed on position descriptions in your company? High, moderate, low, or not at all? I'll give you a few minutes to answer, to give you feedback. And while we wait, I'll share with you 2 of the most recent responses to that question that I've had that captures the majority sentiment. And they were from a director of strategy. Position description? You're kidding me. We only use position descriptions for recruiting. And the other was from a supply chain director: we don't believe in position description. We find it stops people being creative and limits their ability to get things done. Unfortunately, evidence suggests that that's not true. That is, thinking is more likely to limit people's potential, not to mention demotivate people. But we'll explore that in a little more detail in the next section. Well, the results are fairly typical, so I'd suggest that we've got some opportunities to improve in our scores. So let's move on to why position descriptions are important. As one of the best HR managers I've ever worked with was often heard saying, how can you expect people to know what to do unless you help them define it? This is a simple statement, but it's profound in a number of aspects. In one particular study into why relationships break down, any kind of relationships, not business relationships, so you might want to take this home, the number one reason was a mismatch in expectation. Role descriptions are a good way to gain alignment on expectations. Another aspect is if you haven't defined what is expected, then how do you assess people's performance? Obviously, it can be done, and it is done, but it becomes very subjective conversation. And I've seen it lead to confusion at best and anger and hostility at worst. And thirdly, how do you reward things that aren't well articulated and agreed? Anyway, enough said. Let's have a look at how this all starts to come together. There's a common dilemma that I've seen often. It's called the role dilemma. And that is, no matter how excited and motivated people might be about getting involved in a change program, when things get busy, it becomes a choice between the business as usual or BAU role and the transformation to the new ways of working. The BAU role will win hands down every time. So how do we stop this? This is why position or role descriptions are so important. We need to be able to tie together the expectations as defined in the policy and procedure, that is, the way we're going to work together, with people's roles, responsibilities and accountabilities, with what is in their position description, that is, the new way we'd like them to be working and the new expectations, so that it becomes the business as usual way of working, and then to be able to effectively assess how people are performing. All too often, people see new ways of working as extra things to do on top of their BAU role or their daytime job, and we call it the homework syndrome. And if we don't tie it all together, the homework never gets done or gets half done at best. It has to become embedded as the BAU role. Speaking of appraisals, I'm now going to hand over to Stuart for the last of the 5 key appraisals.
Thank you, Rod. Yeah, so appraisals and recognition and reward. So hopefully you're seeing how this ties together and why it's important not to leave this to chance. So this final section is a snapshot on how we should be approaching appraisals and the rewards and recognition process. So the first question to answer is, well, what are we recognising and rewarding? It's a simple question, but quite a complex answer. If we stay on the transformation path, then what becomes apparent is that the things we are appraising actually need to evolve as the transformation is initiated and then matures. So we need to take into account a number of factors. So initially, we'll be looking at appraising the design and deployment of improved ways of working, similar to that role dilemma Rod mentioned a few moments ago. Secondly, then, we need to be looking at the use of the new ways of working. We've designed them, but are we using them? So this is now tying in the definitions around roles and responsibilities and the objective measures or accountabilities. As the transformation further matures, then, we want to be assessing and appraising how well we're realising the benefits that were part of the business case. As mentioned right in the beginning, the value opportunity defined before the change needs to stay top of mind. And we need to routinely come back and measure progress towards those goals. In fact, I would say at this point, one of the biggest single improvement opportunities I see with the majority of my clients is around benefits realisation. We're often too busy to rush off to the next initiative or transformation project without really understanding have we gained the full benefit that we set off to gain at the start. Next, then we look at continuing to realise the benefits that were part of the business case. So once the change has occurred, there then needs to be an expectation that maintenance of the process will deliver continued benefit. And then finally, further improving the new ways of working together. And the expectation, if we continue to focus on those 3 C's of continuous improvement, the application of continuous improvement will continue to deliver even more benefits. Also, this shouldn't be for corrective action. Now, corrective action should be immediate, using a formal framework such as DESC or a FOCAR, which are frameworks designed to give feedback, understand the consequences of actions, and look for an agreed way for rectifying. The ultimate objective is to improve performance and make sure that the new standard we've set is not eroded over time. So it's much like pushing a ball up some steps. We can see in the illustration here. So once you get to the level that you want, you have to make sure that you put a chock in behind the ball to stop it rolling back down the steps. business life is no different to this example. So an interesting question to ponder. We won't ask any more polling questions, but just think about in your organization, the programs you've worked on, how much is that Chock worth? Now think about the ongoing value of the initiative that was identified when the business case was put together at the start. So the 5 elements of sustainability are the foundation for the Chock, for making that Chock work. Now, moving into the final section, we'd like to finish with a brief case study. So this is a case study we've had the privilege to close out recently, and we'd like to share with you just some details about the change. So this was a pilot operating company of a global organization deploying an integrated business planning process across 26 operating companies around the world. So not an insignificant initiative. The company has 2 major channels, a traditional fast-moving consumer goods channel and a B2B or business-to-business channel. Quite separate business models operating under the same roof, so a degree of complexity there. The change program started in earnest in May 2016, and it was going to be a major transformation for the operating company compared to the way they were working together back then, or I should say more appropriately, the way they were not working together. And it was really a textbook example of following the proven path that we shared with you earlier, and took a little over 18 months from the start of the initiative to get to the point of signing off the sustainability plan, which occurred in February of 2018. We then came back just last month to validate the effectiveness of that sustainability plan. So, we sort of had 9 or 10 months to see how well they put that in place. They demonstrated huge benefits in reduced inventory and obsolescence, in improving forecast accuracy and bias, in improving customer service, and much more. But one of the most impressive results was a big improvement in their annual climate survey results, which showed improvements across all categories reviewed. Now, most organizations run an internal climate survey periodically, and I've noticed lots of hand-wringing and frustration amongst executive teams. One of the hardest things you can do as a leader of an organization is to subject yourself to a climate survey, because people get an opportunity to tell you about all the things they're unhappy about. So I always take my hat off to organizations who have the courage to do this. The important thing is that you do something with it. Now, so what happened as a result of the transformation program in this particular organization? So the internal climate survey results, the grand mean, so this was the overall score across all the different subsections of leadership and teamwork and communication and satisfaction, all of that. They moved the grand mean from a score of 4 to a score of 4.23. The overall satisfaction score moved from 4.05 to 4.24. They had a participation rate in the survey of 96%. So 96% of employees gave a response, and those who were actively disengaged, reduced from 9% to 4%. They demonstrated they had a robust sustainability plan. So look, we look forward to reporting on an update to that sustainability in a year or so, and sharing with you all some more of their great outcomes. So as a summary, we've talked about the Chock. A good question to ask and answer is, what is the cost of the Chock versus the ongoing value that could be released? Something really I'd encourage you to think about. It all lies in this virtuous circle that continually cycles through the 5 elements of sustainability that you can see on the screen. Education and training, communication and feedback, formality and discipline, role description, and then appraisal and reward and recognition. If you do these, it ensures the change is further being locked in, and then encourages a continuous improvement mindset. So you find if you apply this, your original transformation program can become the gift that keeps on giving. So that brings us to the conclusion of our webinar for today. On behalf of Rod and myself, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. In the next couple of days, look out for an email from us with a link to access the webinar on demand. Now, if you've got any questions, we'll try and get through as many as we can in the few minutes that we have left. So just looking, you've got any questions that have come through here? So yes, yeah, one. I might throw this over to Rod. You know, it's a question here. What's the ideal performance appraisal cycle? Should it be annual? Should it be quarterly? Should it be monthly? Rod, have you got a view on that?
There's the annual appraisal that we get together at the end of the year, and we try and get through them all and rush through them all. It's gone. My view is that many good organisations are conducting a positive appraisal. I need to be clear on that. It's about have we got the resources and capability of achieving our improvements and our strategic initiatives. It's not about a corrective action. Most of the good ones are doing it once a quarter, and many of my clients are doing it once a month, and obviously separating corrective action with providing resource and support for the improvement program.
Very good, thank you. So another one here, and I might take this one myself in terms of response. So someone's asked, what's the best education program you've seen and why? And that's a really good question. I might actually just reflect on something that I've seen a client do just this year. So as well as transferring knowledge, education's about the why, as Rod talked about earlier. Getting people to then, through the education experience, identify how the process could be further improved, and also think about what it means to their role and how their role could be improved is really important. So, getting groups of people together and sharing the needs that they have, and providing as well that insight into other functions, other parts of the organisation, as to what you require from them in order to be able to do your job effectively. That's a really important part. And as an FMCG company that I've been working with recently, have set up some whole day events where they've taken people through some explanation of the process, and this is for new starters. Explain the why, explain this is how we do things around here, and then ask them to reflect on what their needs are and how they could further improve the process. And coming out of the education session, they've generated a lot of improvement ideas they've been able to take back in and implement, and so they're driving that continuous improvement loop, which is excellent to see. And so I think we've got time for one more question here, and it's always a good one, because we work with a wide range of organisations, as I said at the start of the webinar, from global giants. But we also work with smaller organisations. I've got a question here. How does all this apply if your company is very small, like, e.g. under 100 people? Rod, do you want to maybe take that one?
Yeah, look, I've got one company that has 99 people, as a matter of fact, and they identify in their induction program very similar structure to what we've been through, and appoint a facilitator to take on board things like the integrated business planning process, demand planning, forecasting, health and safety. They have a lean program as their continuous improvement methodology. So there are individuals who come through and step through those sessions. Now, it's not as big as a global company I've got, which has multimedia, mini learning sessions, group learning sessions, games, etc. However, it's still just as effective. And as one person said to me only recently when I went back, yeah, we went through everything and it all made sense and I understood the process. It was a little clunky as I got moving, but it was a head start on starting from cold. So it can be done.
Yeah, very good. And look, a couple of more questions have just come through, so I'm keen that we're able to give some response. So thank you. So from Packthorn's asked a question: how do you know when it's a good time to declare victory? Rod, what's your thought on that one?
Oh, well, because that was the case study, and it's very dear to my heart, is that, and the last case study is that I like to sign off that we've met the goals that we've originally agreed with in the beginning, and the and spend, be very focused on the sustainability plan, and then come back and show that it's actually working, which was the example that the case study Stu took us through at the end. So to me, those two things are absolutely key. The one other thing that I think is really important, it doesn't quite come through in those Kotter elements, is that are we comfortable that the lead team can hold the argument and maintain the rage, so to speak? Because when you've had many CEOs and C-suite people turn over, sometimes their courage and conviction wanes. So going back to induction, in that particular company, each one of those new CEOs had to go through the full induction program. There was no exception.
Yeah, that's really good. And actually that segues into another question we have here. Thank you, Susan, for sending this one. So you asked a question, for organizations which keep changing their strategy and have reorganizations, how do we ensure that people stay motivated? And I think, just building on Rod's comment previously there, if we're doing the re-education, if we've got clear process, policy and procedure, roles are clearly documented, it actually gives people something to hang on to. Change is a constant in business these days. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's real. We see just in the clients we work with, you start a program, by the time you get to the end of it, half the team have changed. So that can be very, very difficult. So the things we talked about through this webinar actually become a bit of an anchor for the people in the organisation to attach themselves to, and that constant communication. It's an opportunity to provide feedback that often gets missed during reorganisations, and when communication isn't present and there's a vacuum, then we see people making it up, and that the rumour mill takes over, and then everyone gets quite nervous and agitated, and all those things can make organisations very hard. So that's I think a vital part of helping people stay motivated. Rod, I'll give you the last word. Any further thoughts on Susan's question there? So for organisations which keep changing their strategy and reorganising, how do we ensure people stay motivated?
Well, I can build on your comments, Stuart. It's a great question, but one of the analogies I often draw is that, as I mentioned earlier, people say, look, policies and procedures and role descriptions, they're very constricting, they're limiting, they box people in and they can't be creative. Firstly, the evidence doesn't support that. And we can provide some reference on there. But the second one is the analogy I use. It's a bit like saying go play football, and today you could play soccer, tomorrow you could play AFL, the day after that you could play rugby, and you'll never get good at anything, and you'll never have the ability to be as creative as some of the top athletes I see when I watch sport. And so to me, the more things are changing, the more you need to be clear on expectations, because that's the part that the HR director we spoke about said, that you can only take people with you if you're going to share information with them and make sure that we're clearly defining the way forward for them. Otherwise, Stuart's right, they make it up, and it's called, in complexity theory, self-organising systems, and it just may not be the system you want to be organised. I hope that answers the question a bit more fully.
Very good. Well, thank you, Rod. I think that's great. So thanks, everybody, for being part of our webinar today. As I said, look out for the email, which will give you details of being able to obtain the webinar on demand. Also, if you're interested in more information, go and have a look at the website. Lots of white papers to download. Rod wrote a white paper on process sustainability, so it's a good reference. If you'd like to have a further conversation with us, please reach out. We're always happy to talk about this stuff. As you can see, we're pretty passionate. And so, please, as we draw to the end of the year, I hope things aren't too stressful in your organisation, and you're going to get a bit of a break. Please be safe, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar, which will be early in 2019. Thanks, everybody.
Bye for now. Have a Merry Christmas.